This is the Do-It-Yourself Guide to Business Buying. Today we're talking about closing the deal. Welcome, business buyers. What is our goal with this video, closing the deal? Well, I want to show you step by step what closing day might look like on the business that you buy. Now, of course, closing day varies a lot depending upon local versus remote and other things, and please don't take this as legal advice. We're just giving you an overview. Now, when it comes to closing the deal, it is different depending upon whether you are executing an asset purchase agreement where you're buying the assets of the business, or you're executing a share purchase agreement where you're buying the shares. They are quite different, but I'm not going to separate them. I'm just going to look at them generally because we're just trying to get a feel for closing day. So what are we going to cover in this video? Well, we're going to cover pre-closing preparation, closing day itself, a review of the key documents involved, what the flow of funds looks like, the execution of the documents, the official transfer of ownership, post-closing activities, and your first steps as a new owner. So lots of details, lots of lists, but that's the way closing day is. Let's go through them one by one. So pre-closing preparation, broke it down into three pieces: our final due diligence, then finalizing the financing, and then preparing the closing documents. This is getting ready. And of course, we like to do a final check on the due diligence. A financial review. We'll take a look at the financial statements and the tax report, legal compliance, whether there's any regulatory issues that need to be taken care of, just a general contract review to see which contracts are active, asset verification, making sure that the assets that we agreed to are the assets that are in the buy-sell agreement, that they match up, employee review, making sure that the employees that we think are coming with us are actually coming with us. Finalizing the financing, another final check, the loan documents, the investor agreements, the escrow agreements. We'll take a final check on those. And of course, preparing the closing documents on a final check. There's quite a few that could be in play. I'm going to give you quite a long list. They're all not likely going to be in play for a given acquisition. Buy-sell agreement, of course, will be, whether it's an asset purchase or a share purchase. Bill of sale typically goes with an asset purchase agreement, but you still want to do asset transfer checking anyway, even if it doesn't involve a bill of sale in an asset purchase. Assignment agreements are about property rights, benefits, ownership, etc., whether that is getting assigned to us as new owners. Assumption agreements are kind of the opposite. That's us taking care of or taking over obligations, liabilities, etc. So it's not unusual for an acquisition to have an assignment agreement, an assumption agreement. It's pretty typical. The next list, loan agreement, whether that's going to be external funding or a seller note or both, depends on the deal. The security agreement, what collateral we're putting up and how it's being secured. Non-compete agreements, sometimes we have them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes there's lease agreements that we have to take over, especially in asset purchase agreements. The due diligence report, we want that with us. We're not necessarily going to share it with the seller, but we do want our due diligence report. We'll have a closing checklist. We'll have a transition plan for some of the items we're going to talk about a little bit later. An IP transfer agreement is part of it if there is IP that we're going to be receiving. Employment agreements, that sometimes applies to the seller who's going to be continuing on for some time, either as part of a transition or for a longer term basis. Sometimes they just want to act as consultants, so a consulting agreement might be part of it, a compliance certificate, a stock transfer agreement if we're buying shares. So those are all the possible documents that we might want to just make sure are ready to go. Like I said, doubtful that you would have them all. Closing day, where we start with the agenda for the day, the schedule of events, the documents that are going to be signed, any last-minute items that need addressed between buyer and seller, confirmation of the participants, which is typically the buyer or buyers, the seller or sellers, legal counsel for both, and any advisors who have helped on the deal. Next, let's look at reviewing key documents. We're going to go through some of these documents section by section with the seller. Obvious choice is the buy-sell agreement. We're going to cover the purchase price. We're going to review the terms of the seller note, if any. Look at the assets and liabilities being transferred. We're probably going to take a look at representations and warranties. We just want to make sure there's clarity between buyer and seller on these issues. And typically the lawyers will be the ones going through that exercise. Paying special attention to things like indemnifications, dispute resolutions, contingent liabilities, etc. We don't go through every document in detail, but certainly the buy-sell agreement, there'll be a fair amount of detail. Next, the bill of sale or an asset transfer. Bill of sale is for an asset purchase. It's really essential to assure that the assets that we agreed to in negotiation are the assets included in the buy-sell agreement. So that's key. and clarification on any document in terms of the items that we noted. Earlier, we looked at 16 different agreements or documents. We're not going to discuss them all with the seller. The buy, sell, and the bill of sale, of course, we will be discussing those. If there are things being assigned or we're assuming liabilities, yes, we're going to discuss that with the seller. The loan agreement and the security agreement only for the seller note. External financing, we're probably not going to discuss that with the seller. Non-compete agreement, if there is one, yes, perhaps. Lease agreement, if it's an asset purchase. Due diligence report, closing checklist, and the transition plan. Those are documents we want to have at the closing, but we're not necessarily going to go through them with the seller. If there's IP that's being transferred, yes, we can look at that agreement. Employment agreements, we do want to confirm that, so that is something I'm going to talk about with the seller. If we have a consulting agreement with them that's going to cover the transition period, we might review that. A compliance certificate, depending upon if we're in a kind of regulated industry where they're required. And a stock transfer agreement we will definitely be discussing if it's a share purchase. Next, I want to take a look at flow of funds, which is the itemized tracking of inflows and outflows on the closing day. Let me set up an example. Target Co. is being acquired. The purchase price is $2 million. We're making a closing payment of $900,000 and a seller note of $1.1 million. Of the $900,000 closing payment, $300,000 is coming from equity. The other $600,000 is coming from acquisition debt. So we will put together flow of funds that itemizes the tracking of the inflows and the outflows. So the equity investment and the acquisition debt are being paid into the escrow account. From the escrow account, we make disbursements. These disbursements are prearranged and they're mutually agreed to between buyer and seller. What kind of disbursements are we talking about here? Well, here are some possibilities. Financial debt. If this is a debt-free transaction and there's credit card debt or a line of credit debt, we will take the closing payment. Instead of giving it to the seller, we'll use it to pay off that financial debt. Of course, through the mutual agreement of both parties. Sometimes prorated expenses are paid as a disbursement out of the escrow account, particularly taxes. Employee-related expenses like accrued wages and vacation pay, etc., that depends entirely on the terms of the agreement. Sometimes they will be paid as a disbursement, other times not. But professional fees, if they were incurred by the company on behalf of the seller and they haven't been paid yet, then yeah, that money is coming out as a disbursement. Same with transaction costs that were accrued, whether it has to do with appraisals, maybe asset appraisals or environmental reviews, whatever. Deferred revenue on work not yet started. If we've taken a customer deposit and we haven't used any of it to get inventory or supplies or done any work, then some of that deferred revenue could indeed be paid as a disbursement because the new owners, of course, are going to have to do that work. And sometimes money remains in the escrow account if a holdback was negotiated. So a portion of the closing payment to the seller is sometimes delayed. A holdback could be 10%, 20%. It is a risk mitigation item. Sometimes people say, well, you don't need a holdback if you have a seller note, which we do in this case. We have a $1.1 million seller note, but we can't use that as a holdback. That's financing. Holdbacks are risk mitigation. And if we tried to convert our financing into a risk mitigation tool, we would have a lot of problems. So it's not unusual for deals to have both a holdback and a seller note. So let me take a look at it schematically just to sort of sum it up so you get the whole picture. We have an escrow account. It's important. This isn't stuff you typically have to worry about yourself. You're going to have legal counsel that's going to take care of all this for you. Money is being paid into that escrow account through the equity investment and the acquisition debt. We have disbursements. We just took a look at that. And of course, closing payment going to the seller as well, with the potential and possibility that some of it is being held back. And really, the itemization of that is what we mean by flow of funds. Number 5, execution of the documents. The signing order gets established, typically starting with the buy-sell agreement. It is the main agreement in the transaction. Then we have loan documents, promissory note, seller note, etc. They are part of the order sequence. Lease transfers, of course, to contingent upon ownership change. Assignments and conveyances that are related to the transaction. Employment or consulting agreements, right, as part of the transition especially. Other ancillary agreements like non-compete, etc. We put together our signing order list, right? We go through the documents one by one. Now, in terms of execution, it's the simplest part of it. All, of course, supervised and quarterbacked by your legal counsel. Now, a notary is required in some jurisdictions for witnessing signatures or providing a notary seal on documents. In some jurisdictions, certain kinds of assets can't be transferred without a notary seal, so that might come into play as well, depending upon where you live. But the execution of documents in terms of the execution process, Yeah, the individual signings, the parties just initial each page and sign the last one for each agreement. Typically, the lawyers do put small post it notes on there to make it really easy. These things have to be witnessed as well. So the witnesses observe the signing, sign themselves, and then affirm themselves as witnesses. And like I said, sometimes notarization is needed. The notary verifies the signature and stamps with a notary seal. Now, remote closings are definitely possible. The process is pretty much the same. The only real difference is we're meeting on Zoom or some other meeting platform instead of face to face. And of course, the signatures are going to be digital. But here's the thing, the digital signatures must be compliant. Compliant with what? Well, federally, it's the e-Sign Act, Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act. And so you have to have a compliant vendors. Now, there are a lot out there. Some of the ones that you may be familiar with, DocuSign, Adobe Sign, PandaDoc. There are a couple more. If you sign with some other non-compliant vendor, you don't necessarily have an enforceable legal agreement. So make sure you've got that covered off as well. Next, the official transfer of ownership. We want to take possession of physical control of the business. Facilities, we need keys, we need access codes, we need access to the alarm system, etc. We're going to take possession of digital control of the business. So we get control of the web admin accounts, the encrypted accounts, the passwords, cybersecurity, etc. And we're going to take possession of employee communications, whatever the internal communication system is, and whatever public communication protocols are in place. We want to have firm possession of those. And then, of course, there's post-closing activities after everything is signed, sealed, and delivered. The goal here is to ensure a smooth transition. These are activities, however, that are undertaken immediately, some, in fact, the same day as closing. Let's just touch on a few of these post-closing activities. First one is obviously the notification of change in ownership to employees, customers, suppliers, and whoever else needs to be notified. You definitely want to update the bank signing authority as well. It might require a resolution, but you want to get the banking done same day if possible. You're going to have to transfer utilities or other services as needed. Again, more prevalent in an asset purchase. You're going to update business registrations and licenses as needed. You have to notify the tax authorities of a change in ownership in the business. Update insurance coverage as needed. And of course, update online accounts and social media. There are more things we can put on here. We're just trying to give you a feel. As soon as you're signed, everything is executed and you're the owners, there are things you need to do right away. So you definitely need a post-closing activity list. And then, of course, there's first steps as new owner. The goal is to set business priorities, set the tone for business culture, open lines of communication, initiate a vision for business improvement. We don't want to come in too hot as new owners and make too dramatic of changes too soon in the process. Now, sometimes businesses do need immediate help, and so we don't have the luxury of waiting, but we do want to make a good first impression as well. So these first steps are important. That's closing day. It's dependent upon multiple factors. The goal here was just to give you a feel for how it might unfold. Depending upon where you are, depending upon whether it's a share purchase or an asset purchase, things will look slightly different, but this should give you a good feel. And that concludes our do-it-yourself guide. Good luck in your business buying adventure, and don't forget to celebrate, and let's get after it. This is the Do-It-Yourself Guide to Business Buying, and today we've been talking about closing the deal, because we always want to learn and grow as we go. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.